Welcome to the Counterpoint. It's the debate show where we take the arguments you're seeing online and, well, we tear them apart to see how they actually work.
Right, we get past the aesthetics and look at the actual data.
Exactly. So picture this. You are a college student right now. You've spent the last, 3 or 4 years grinding through exams, racking up student debt, all for the promise of the shiny, stable corporate career. You've been sold the whole girl boss dream, right?
Oh, yeah. Climb the ladder, shatter the glass ceiling, lean in.
Lean in, exactly. But then you look at the reality of the modern workforce, and the ladder is just completely broken. The burnout is real, the entry-level salaries don't even cover rent, and suddenly your social media feed is flooded with a completely different vision of success.
You're talking about the explosion of the Tradwife and the hashtag stay-at-home girlfriend content.
Yes, women your exact age, broadcasting these highly aestheticized lives centered on baking sourdough from scratch, wearing vintage dresses, embracing traditional domesticity, and they are completely rejecting the corporate grind. So today, our central debate is this. Is this online movement a genuine, empowering rebellion against the failures of corporate feminism, or
is it a performative, commodified financial trap that sells a regressive fantasy to stressed-out young women?
Exactly. And I am taking the position that this movement, controversial as it is, it represents a completely valid, rational retreat from the crushing demands of the modern economy. It's a survival strategy.
And I argue that it is a highly curated, fetishized identity economy. It's a facade. It obscures massive economic privilege, and honestly, it repackages right-wing ideology. Rather than offering a true escape from capitalism, I think it creates a dangerous financial trap, stripping young women of their autonomy right when they need it most.
Okay, but hear me out on this. The Tradwife trend is, at its absolute core, a legitimate backlash against the profoundly broken system. Sociological research over the past decade has shown us that popular feminism basically failed women.
How so?
Well, it demanded that women lean into a corporate structure that was never built for them, right? While still expecting them to bear the brunt of unpaid domestic work. Sociologists literally call this the double shift. You work 8 hours at a desk, commute an hour each way, only to come home to the second shift.
The cooking, the cleaning, the emotional labor.
All of it. So for a generation of college students staring down an absolutely brutal job market, this new digital aesthetic successfully elevates something that has been historically totally devalued: care labor. It says that making a home is valuable, dignified work, and honestly, it offers a psychological escape from the relentless hustle culture that is burning everybody out.
Look, the burnout you're identifying is absolutely real. Nobody is denying that the entry-level job market is a nightmare right now.
It's terrible.
It is. But the cure being sold here is fundamentally toxic. We have to separate the exhaustion of the modern worker from the product being marketed to her. Because this movement, it's a performance. We are looking at influencers who are commodifying an unattainable standard of domestic perfection.
Unattainable? They're just baking bread and making a nice home.
But it requires immense hidden economic privilege. Wealthy partners, cleaners, nannies, massive amounts of disposable income to actually look that effortless on camera. And worse, it uses the language of choice feminism.
Okay, define that for the audience real quick.
Choice feminism basically operates on the premise that any choice a woman makes is inherently empowering simply because she's the one making it. But that logic completely collapses when we look at the mechanics of power. True empowerment and true choice are simply not possible when you are tethered to absolute financial dependence.
See, you're dismissing the agency of the women making this choice by framing it as some sort of trick. Let's look at the actual economic reality driving this. There's this recent sociological analysis out of the Annenberg School, and they found something fascinating. Tradwives and mainstream feminists are actually fueled by the exact same rage.
Rage about what, though?
About the system. They are looking at astronomical childcare costs, a total lack of care infrastructure in this country, no paid maternity leave, and crushing career burnout. The modern workplace just turns people into mere revenue generators for a boss.
Sure, but
Let me just finish this thought. For a young woman analyzing her future prospects, adopting the Tradwife lifestyle is simply rejecting that scam. She's saying, I am not going to be a cog in a machine that doesn't care about me. It is a shared response to systemic failures, not just a performative trick.
I agree that the diagnosis of the disease is correct. The system is undeniably failing working mothers and it's failing young graduates. But the Tradwife solution relies entirely on individual retreat rather than collective reform.
What's wrong with saving yourself?
Because instead of fighting for, universal pre-K, better maternity leave, or an equitable division of labor at home, the message broadcasted to millions of young women is just find a wealthy man to pay for everything. It frames total submission to a husband as a radical act of self-care. But how empowering is that choice when it requires you to surrender your paycheck?
I mean, a paycheck isn't the only form of power.
But without your own income, you don't actually have autonomy in a relationship. You have permission. You are literally trading the visible boss at the office for an invisible boss in your living room. And you've stripped yourself of the capital necessary to ever walk away from the negotiation table.
You are assuming that the corporate workplace offers a superior form of autonomy, which is highly debatable in today's gig economy. I mean, mass layoffs, AI taking entry-level jobs.
But at least the corporate world gives you a W-2 instead of an allowance.
Let me offer a different framework. If the corporate world right now is a burning building, and for many recent grads it absolutely feels like one, with stagnant wages and soaring inflation, is it fair to criticize women for finding the nearest fire escape?
Even if that fire escape is a regressive 1950s marriage?
Even if it looks like a traditional marriage, yes, because extensive surveys of young women consuming this content show they aren't watching it because they possess some deep ideological desire to return to the 1950s. They are watching it as an imagined alternative to the severe mental health pressures of modern work. It functions as a coping mechanism.
Right, it's an aesthetic meditation.
Exactly. It's a visual meditation on what life could be like if our labor wasn't exclusively extracted for corporate profit.
But we have to look at the mechanics of what happens when you step out onto that specific fire escape. You aren't stepping onto solid ground. You are stepping onto a ledge with absolutely no safety net. And this brings us to the reality of what these young college students are actually consuming on their screens. It isn't a genuine, achievable lifestyle. It is a fetishized identity economy.
Okay, let's unpack how that economy actually functions. Because I think that term gets thrown around in academic circles without acknowledging the real value being created.
Well, I'll break it down so it makes sense for someone just trying to navigate their career options. The fetishized identity economy is a framework where a person's digital identity isn't just a reflection of their life. It becomes their actual capital. It's a staged performance designed to extract maximum engagement.
Right, but all social media's a performance.
Yeah. But this is on another level. Look at the famous case of the Chinese influencer, Sister Yu. She built an absolute empire on Douyin, which is the Chinese equivalent of TikTok, performing this hyper-authentic, exaggerated rural femininity.
Oh, she was the one doing all the manual labor, right?
Exactly. Slaughtering pigs, building brick walls by hand, cooking these massive rustic meals over open fires. And she generated millions of dollars and captivated millions of stressed urban workers. But then it came out that the village she filmed in was essentially a movie set.
Wow.
Yeah. Her team rented houses and hired production crews just to film the content. It wasn't real rural life. It was a staged class performance. Western Tradwives and stay-at-home girlfriends are executing the exact same playbook. They are cosplaying the 1950s for algorithmic visibility. The irony here is that they aren't escaping capitalism at all. They are hyper-capitalist influencers selling the illusion of a slow life.
Okay, you're looking at this strictly through the lens of multimillionaire influencers and massive production companies. But that ignores the everyday viewer and the micro-creators who are participating in this trend.
They're still performing for a camera.
Yes, the absolute top American Tradwives are making fortunes, but that performative aspect at the very top doesn't invalidate the underlying appeal of the lived reality for the everyday participant.
Research analyzing everyday women adopting this lifestyle, creators with very small followings, reveals that a massive portion of these women are lower income, middle class, and women of color.
But they're still trying to monetize it.
Maybe, but they aren't staging costs for millions of dollars. They are retreating to the home because daycare costs quite literally exceed their entry-level salaries. They are driven by actual, brutal economic math. When your entire paycheck goes to paying someone else to raise your child, staying home and baking your own bread isn't algorithmic cost play. It is a rational survival strategy.
Look, the math of childcare in this country is brutal, I will give you that. But you cannot separate the everyday user from the massive influencer ecosystem that is feeding them this ideology. You say they aren't performing, but let's examine the hidden labor of the influencer economy itself. Take the stay-at-home girlfriend trend.
Okay.
If a 22-year-old stay-at-home girlfriend is spending 40 hours a week setting up ring lights, writing scripts, curating a flawless domestic aesthetic, editing videos, recording voiceovers, and negotiating brand deals for her TikTok channel, is she actually a stay-at-home girlfriend?
Well, she's working from home.
No. She is a covert girl boss operating a highly demanding digital media startup from her kitchen counter. She is doing the grueling work of a modern entrepreneur, but the trend forces her to deny that she's working at all. To successfully perform the role of a woman who has opted out of capitalism, you literally have to become one of the most ruthless capitalists on the internet. It's a complete paradox that masks labor as leisure.
But wait, isn't that paradox actually the most brilliant part of this entire phenomenon?
How is masking labor brilliant?
Because by monetizing their domestic routines through social media platforms, these creators have inadvertently achieved one of the ultimate goals of the 1970s feminist movement: wages for housework.
Oh, come on. That is a massive stretch.
It's really not. In the 70s, feminists recognized that society functions entirely on the unpaid domestic labor of women. The cooking, the cleaning, the child rearing, and they demanded compensation for it. Fast forward to today, and these creators have actually solved that problem via platform capitalism.
By getting TikTok to pay them?
Yes, they are literally being paid by advertisers and algorithms to bake bread, fold laundry, and organize their pantries. They figured out how to extract a paycheck for the social reproductive labor that society has always expected women to do for free. If you're a college student terrified of being trapped in a cubicle, seeing a woman secure a massive brand sponsorship just to make a matcha latte in her kitchen, that looks like a monumental win for female financial autonomy.
It looks like a win until you examine the underlying structure of the creator economy. The brutal reality is that only the top 1% of 1% of influencers actually secure those so-called wages for their housework. They are the ones getting the brand deals.
There's a middle class of creators, though.
A very small one. What happens to the average young woman who watches that content, buys into the ideology, quits her entry-level job without a monetization strategy, and just expects the Tradlife to protect her? This is where the fetishized identity economy becomes a tangible threat to financial autonomy.
Every career path has risks.
But this risk is catastrophic. When we look at the economic data on private pensions, a terrifying reality emerges for this lifestyle. Right now, women's private pensions are already worth 35% less than men's. When a 24-year-old drops out of the workforce, she isn't just losing a $50,000 salary for a few years. She's losing 4 decades of compounding interest on a retirement account.
Well, ideally, her partner is investing for both of them.
But she has no legal guarantee of that. She's losing employer matches, career advancement, networking opportunities. She is trading millions of dollars in future security for aesthetic comfort today.
I absolutely acknowledge the mechanics of compounding interest, and yes, the risks of a resume gap are real. If you have no financial safety net, you are vulnerable. But again, you are stripping away the intellectual agency of the women making these choices. And frankly, you're operating on a very narrow modern definition of what a traditional woman actually is.
What do you mean?
The idea that a traditional wife never earns a dime and just passively sits at home is historically inaccurate. If we look at the famous Proverbs 31 woman from the Judeo-Christian tradition, which is like the ultimate historical blueprint for the traditional wife, she is buying fields, she is planting vineyards from her own earnings, she is managing an estate.
Okay,
but she has her own earnings.
Right, and my point is that for most families throughout history, a mother's labor force participation waxes and wanes with the needs of the family. The online aesthetic is just the digital era's version of that historical negotiation of roles. Women aren't naive. They know exactly what they are doing. They are prioritizing domestic efficiency, family cohesion, and personal well-being over a corporate paycheck that, like we said earlier, barely covers the cost of commuting and childcare anyway.
But you just made my exact point for me. You mentioned the Proverbs 31 woman. She had her own earnings. She was buying fields and managing capital. The modern stay-at-home girlfriend aesthetic on TikTok is actively promoting the exact opposite of that.
They're just promoting a softer life.
They are promoting the idea that relying entirely on a boyfriend's credit card is the ultimate form of self-care. It operates like an Instagram filter for financial dependency. By framing this hyper-feminine, dependent lifestyle as empowering, these influencers sidestep the systemic inequities that make this choice unattainable for the vast majority of people. And we haven't even touched on the darkest mechanism at play here, the algorithmic pipeline.
The algorithmic pipeline? That sounds a bit conspiratorial.
It's not a conspiracy, it's just how the tech works. We know exactly how recommendation engines on platforms like Instagram and TikTok function. They are designed for maximum retention, and they do this by escalating content.
Sure, they feed you more of what you watch.
Right, so it starts with an algorithm serving a young, stressed-out college student a harmless video on how to make a sourdough starter, or how to romanticize her morning coffee. Because she watched that, the recommendation engine feeds her content on natural living. That natural living content bleeds into videos about traditional gender roles.
And you're saying that leads to extremism?
Yes. Before long, she is being served overt alt-right and white nationalist propaganda about preserving the traditional family structure. The algorithm connects the desire for a peaceful home life directly to regressive patriarchal ideologies. It uses the aesthetic appeal of a slow life as a Trojan horse to radicalize young women into believing their only inherent value is domestic submission.
Okay, the algorithm certainly escalates content, and I don't deny that extremist elements exist on the fringes of literally any internet subculture. But you cannot invalidate the core human desire for rest just because a recommendation engine occasionally surfaces extreme political content.
It's more than occasionally, though.
But the vast majority of women consuming and creating this content are not being radicalized into white nationalism. They are simply trying to figure out how to survive a crushing economic reality. Furthermore, we are sitting here insisting that the only valid form of capital is a paycheck deposited by a corporation.
It's the most reliable form of capital.
Is it? These influencers, and even the micro-influencers, are generating what sociologists call persona capital. By curating these digital identities, they are building highly valuable networks, intense audience loyalty, and substantial social influence.
Which only matters if you monetize it.
But that persona capital is a highly liquid form of currency in the modern digital economy. It gives them leverage that a mid-level manager at a logistics firm simply does not have. They can pivot that audience into a business anytime they want.
Persona capital only pays the bills if you have the mechanism to monetize it, like you said. For the millions of young women watching this content, they aren't building persona capital. They are just consuming it. They are the product being sold to advertisers.
They're finding a community.
The influencer gets the brand deal and the persona capital. The viewer just gets a romanticized, staged fantasy that actively generates a sense of inadequacy about her own life. And that inadequacy is exactly what drives the consumption of the sponsored products.
So it's just regular advertising then?
But it's insidious. The influencer performs this nostalgic, rustic lifestyle, carefully obscuring the invisible labor that actually makes it possible. The cleaning services, the nannies, the wealthy partner underwriting the entire production. It creates a synthetic ideal that most women cannot and should not be expected to achieve. It's presenting young, stressed-out students with what looks like a valid career path, but in reality, it's a lottery ticket wrapped in a vintage apron.
Look, I'm not arguing that this is a guaranteed, scalable career path for every single woman who posts a video of herself baking. I'm arguing that the immense popularity of this content is a massive blinking warning sign about the fundamental unsustainability of modern labor markets.
On that, we agree.
Right.
If millions of young women are watching a 60-second video of someone folding laundry in a sunlit room and thinking, wow, that looks infinitely better than my future, then we have completely failed them in the workplace. The corporate world currently demands the undivided loyalty and time commitment of a 1950s male breadwinner,
while offering absolutely none of the financial security or pensions that generation enjoyed.
Exactly. And simultaneously, society still expects women to perform the 1950s domestic labor when they clock out at 6 p.m. The Tradwife trend, whether it's performative or not, is simply calling the bluff on the neoliberal girl boss promise. It is proof that women are exhausted by a system that demands everything and provides nothing.
And that is precisely where we converge. The system is undeniably failing working mothers, and it is absolutely failing the young people who are trying to navigate this economy right now. The fact that balancing a career and a family feels like an impossible mathematical equation is exactly why this content is so incredibly seductive. The exhaustion is real.
It's very real.
But the solution to a broken labor market isn't to retreat into a highly curated 1950s financial trap. The danger for young women consuming this media is that it masks severe economic vulnerability under the guise of self-care. It tells them the answer is to give up their capital. But true independence requires capital.
It requires options.
Right. The answer is to demand better policies, flexible working conditions, equitable partnerships, and real structural support. We have to critically evaluate the difference between a curated online brand optimized for an algorithm and a sustainable, protected life choice in the real world. When an influencer tells you to quit your job and rely entirely on a partner, you really have to ask yourself who is actually profiting from that message.
The platform is profiting, mostly.
The influencer is profiting, the platform is profiting, but the viewer is left entirely exposed.
Yet, the desire for a slower life, the dread of the corporate grind, and the anger at a system that views human beings purely as economic inputs, that is all completely valid. The Tradwife aesthetic might rely on a staged performance, but the profound exhaustion it speaks to is deeply, undeniably real. Whether someone chooses to lean into the corporate world or step back into the domestic sphere, they just have to do it with their eyes wide open to the economic mechanics of both paths.
Exactly. I mean, if the corporate world is a burning building, by all means, look for an exit. Just make sure that when you step out, you aren't trading a difficult job for absolute financial dependency. You have to ensure you still hold the keys to your own life.
And that's where we leave it for today. The intense friction between the need to survive a brutal modern economy and the very real dangers of surrendering your financial independence. Think about the underlying mechanics the next time a perfectly curated, slow-living aesthetic pops up on your feed. What is the algorithm really selling you? And what will it actually cost you to buy into it?